Make every night a wonderful journey, no matter where you are. Good night, sweet dreams. The first story, The Mirror of Truth. My grandmother had a hand mirror. It was beautiful. It had gems surrounding the center mirror, and little tiny mirrors in between them. The result is a view of your face from every angle unimaginable. Except for behind your head, we weren't allowed to touch it. But that didn't stop us from occasionally sneaking in and trying it out. Because my brother and I were interested in the paranormal, we often tried to contact spirits. One time, while we were looking up the paranormal on the internet, we found something about Bloody Mary. It said that if you were to be in a pitch black room with no lights, in front of a mirror, and say Bloody Mary 3 times, she would be summoned. We had a mirror, but we had to choose a dark room. I remember that we chose the shed, and we set everything up. I set up our video camera to show us as we were doing it. Of course, the tape was burned as our house was, but that's another story. We turned the lights off and looked into the mirror. Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary. I turned towards Braden. Bloody Mary. My heart almost stopped. I looked at my brother. It didn't work. Let's go back inside, I said. I looked at the mirror. My reflection looked back at me. Or at least that's what I thought, for when we turned the lights back on, my reflection was no longer me. It was a little girl. I looked at her, she looked back at me. I smiled and she did too. Braden came over to look. He was amazed by her. Let me try, he uttered. Holding back a cry of joy, he looked into the mirror. She was gone. There must have been a reason for why the little girl only appeared for me. Since then, she always appeared for me whenever I looked into the mirror. Nobody other than Braden and my friends knew about her. Not even my grandmother. She told us stories of the future, and as far as I could tell, she was right. It told of Mr. Jacob's death, Brandon's death, and finally my brother's death, before we lost the mirror for good. We learned of her name. It wasn't Bloody Mary, it was Sarah. The second story, The Endless Maze. To anyone who reads this, I'm writing this diary in case somebody else got trapped in this sick place. Inside you'll find my story and a few hints that may help you survive. Maybe you'll find a way out of this madness, as I have already given up all hope. I woke up in a corner of a clean, square hallway. I remembered nothing about how I had gotten here, how long I was out, what did I do before, or even who I was. The floor was green, and the walls were made out of what seemed like rounded concrete blocks. First thing that struck me was the outfit I was wearing. A white and blue suit with a big, heavy helmet that I couldn't take off. No matter how hard I tried, it looked like if I was testing something or something like that. I looked almost like a crash dummy, except I was all white and blue. Both ends of the hallway were sealed with brick walls, and next to me was a small stash of what seemed to be explosives. I noticed there were no ventilation grates or any other holes around. To be honest, I found myself breathing heavily and realized that I'm about to run out of air here. I had to get out of here fast. I looked at my options and decided there's nothing I can do here except one thing. I examined the brick wall on one side. It didn't look too sturdy. To be exact, it looked like if someone placed it in here in a hurry, in an attempt to wall me, and the explosives weren't here by accident, either, without wasting any more time. I grabbed them all and placed one charge on the brick wall, then hid in the only place I could think of behind the corner. 3 seconds later, the wall was history. The explosive turned out to be pretty strong, though It didn't even scratch the concrete walls. My helmet muffled most of the sound, yet the flames have almost reached the corner itself. When it was over, I took a deep breath followed by a sigh of relief, as the corridor was filled with fresh air coming from the outer part. I went through what was left of the wall and took a look around. I was in a maze of corridors just like the one I woke up in. I quickly noticed that it resembles something more like a huge hall with thick, cubic pillars distributed evenly across it, and the fragile brick walls placed at seemingly random places in between. At least the way it was built ensured I won't get lost, as I could easily keep track of micro-coordinates in relation to the place I started in, which seemed to be located in a corner of the structure. I passed by a few more junctions and dead ends when I encountered it. A huge, floating, translucent like a light ball, hovered and silently from behind a corner took a turn into my direction. It had a pair of eyes in the front, focused on me as it was closing the distance between us. I stood there for a while, paralyzed by fear, and then took a run for it. The thing wasn't moving fast, but it didn't stop even for a second, and despite how simple-minded and easy to fool it seemed, it managed to chase me into what I knew was a dead end. With nothing to lose, I threw a bomb on the ground behind me and jumped into a niche right before it filled the hallway with loud noise and bright flames. When I finally peeked from behind the corner, I noticed that there was no trace of the creature chasing me. I wasn't sure whether I got it, or it simply ran away upon seeing the explosive, but the latter seemed impossible after all. It seemed as dull as a zombie on antidepressants. Upon a closer look around, I saw that one of the brick walls around was caught in the explosion, revealing another stash of explosives. These seemed different from the ones I was carrying, so I tried one bomb out to find out that it's at least twice as powerful as the others. It still didn't affect the outer walls, though without thinking twice, I ditched my old bombs to replace them with these new ones. The creature was nowhere to be found. The thought that these things can be killed gave me a little confidence. After all, they were so stupid it would be no problem to lure them over to one of these charges with some careful planning. It didn't take long until I saw what I expected to more of these things, totally identical, coming at me as fast as their primitive, slow-moving bodies could manage. I lured them into what I thought would be a safe spot to perform this, set my trap and waited for the result. As predicted, nothing was left of them, except their primitive eyeballs, which quickly dissolved after they fell on the ground. Now I knew without doubt that I can kill them. It was time to get out of here. After what seemed to be an eternity of placing charges in seemingly random places, one of the destroyed walls revealed it, or to some sort of an elevator. It didn't budge, though, so I figured there must be a way to open it from somewhere else. Soon after I encountered one more of those things, and when I was done with it, I heard a buzzer in the distance. I knew where it was coming from, so I rushed to the door. The elevator had no buttons, and as soon as I entered it, the door closed behind me, and lights went off. Before I realized what happened, I found myself standing in the corner of a clean, square hallway with a green floor and white walls. I went through 5 more halls, finding more explosive charges and a remote fuse for them before I collapsed. In my attempt to find a way out, I lost track of time. I had a dream. Unsurprisingly, I was in the same green and white hall, but there were no walls between pillars, and there was no door to be found. Instead, there were several of those creatures floating around. I kept destroying them, but more came. I made a mistake and detonated the bomb too early, only to realize that it does nothing to me. I realized it's all a dream and woke up. I'll keep going. I encounter several other types of creatures on my way, all as primitive, but some moving faster than the others. I gotta be careful. Things are getting ugly. Another hole. I found something weird. A pair of roller skates. Who the fuck would leave a pair of roller skates in such a twisted place? Then I thought about it once again. The floor seemed to be flattened hard enough for these to actually work. I could move around fast without tiring myself out too fast. What did I have to lose? I put them on. Perfect fit, I predicted. I moved faster and with ease through the halls. I probably look silly like that. A white crash dummy with roller skates. Placing bombs. Looking for a way out still. I don't think anybody is watching me. If this some kind of a sick experiment, it probably failed and was abandoned. What else could explain the existence of things straight out of the primordial soup, but larger than a person? I'll keep going. I can clear the rooms at a much faster pace right now. Maybe I'll find a way out of this living hell before I collapse. Wait, that's it. I don't feel hungry or dehydrated, it seems. Maybe that's what they're testing here. I'll probably find out if I keep going. I can't take it anymore. It's an endless loop of hallways and monsters. I had the same dream again. Did my invincibility there mean anything? Once in a while I find even bigger piles of better explosives, and some of the same devices I have already gathered. I encountered a new kind of a monsterate, as some kind of a blue ooze. But what's worse, it seems to ignore the brick walls. I'm terrified. There's no safe place for me now. I sit in a corner as I write this, looking around nervously. If two of these things happen to gang up on me, I'm done for. I found a new item, a syringe with something blue in it. I can't help but think of the use of shit. I heard something. I gotta run for it. It was bound to happen after a while, too, as it caught me unaware. I had no other option. I injected myself with this blue shit. Turns out I can walk through bricks now. Still can't even budge the concrete walls though. I'll keep going. Had nothing to write about. Until this point the dream keeps coming back. Among other crap, I found another syringe. It's blood red. Nothing else happened, except for another wall-crossing creature making its appearance. But ever since there was nothing new. Maybe I'm close to the end of this hell, but I have nothing to lose. I decided to try out the liquid. I can't stop thinking about that dream. That's it. I'm immune. Yes. You read it right, immune to fire. I blast my way through halls at the speed of light, yet the feeling that I'm nowhere near the end has returned. Absolutely nothing new happened. I'm starting to get used to this. I lost all hope this will never end. I'm leaving these notes here. Maybe someone will make use of them. I'll keep going. I'm pretty much unstoppable at this point. I still don't know who I am, but I think I could have suffered a fate much worse than being the bomber man. The third story. Eyes on the ceiling. The shadow eyes. Something truly odd has been happening here for months now, and I haven't been able to explain it at all, so I'm going to tell you my story, and hope that somebody out there can help me find a rational explanation for the whole thing. Before I start, let me tell you a little something about myself. I was in college for a few years, and graduated this year. So, as a result, A lot of the things in my apartment are mostly old, hand-me-downs from relatives and things like that. I was so busy as a college student in the past that I didn't even have time to go out and buy new things for my apartment, even though I could afford it. So I would mostly use other things like blankets to cover my windows with. This brings us to the important part of the story. Keep in mind, this takes place over a whole span of 2 months and a half. It started one June morning when I woke up to the feeling that I was being watched. I looked around the room and saw nothing out of the ordinary. I was puzzled as to why I kept getting this feeling until I looked up at the ceiling near the window. There was a single shadow shaped like an eye, and it appeared to be looking directly at me. I did find it somewhat creepy, but figured that it was harmless after all. It was just the shadows making odd shapes, which they always did here, so I ignored it and went on with my life. However, as the days passed, that I didn't go away, and what's more, it seemed to be multiplying. After 1 week passed, there were now 5 shadow eyes surrounding the area around my window. The feeling that I was being watched continued to intensify. 2. Much to my annoyance, the realist in me kept on saying that it was only in my head, that it was only the old blankets I used as my bedroom curtains that were causing those eyes to appear. After all, the old blankets did have those tiny holes in them, which could easily cast all sorts of weird shadows. But despite this rational explanation, I still found myself feeling completely disconcerted by those eyes, especially when they started to blink and move their pupils around as if they were alive. As the weeks passed by, the eyes continued to increase in numbers until they covered the entire ceiling. I've enclosed some photos of them that I took with my phone camera, so you can see for yourself that I'm not lying about the whole thing. Unfortunately, it doesn't show the other half of the ceiling very well. It's poor lighting conditions still. It shows you exactly what I wake up to every morning now. After a month, I had gotten used to them and simply resigned myself to the fact that they would always be there. It got to the point where I started ignoring them again and going on about my business as if they weren't there. This is kind of embarrassing to admit, but after I had gotten used to them being there, I stopped being self-conscious about doing things like masturbating in front of the eyes. I basically thought to myself, what the heck, they're only shadows, and I'm horny as fuck. I need some release. This was when something somewhat weird would happen. The eyes on the ceiling seemed to react to my actions at this point. They would all blink furiously as they watched me pleasure myself. The weird part, there seemed to be an increase in the number of eyes as I did it, although they could easily be all in my head after all. It's not like I took the time to count them all. Around July 16th, my mom decided to stay the night. Considering how she had to get up at like 3 a.m. for work, my place was much closer to her workplace, since she lived in the next town over, so it made sense for her to stay here instead of driving for an hour in the dark. So I agreed to let her stay the night. However, my apartment had only 1 bedroom, so I had to let her sleep in my bedroom while I took the sofa in the living room. The next morning, she looked completely unsettled. When I asked her what was wrong, she mentioned that there was something strange on my ceiling. I smiled, saying something to the effect of, "Oh yeah, the eyes, they've been here for a month." I did find them creepy at first, but I've gotten used to them. She became even more upset at this, and demanded to know why I didn't call her right away when they first appeared. I just shrugged, saying I didn't see what the big deal was. It's not as if they were realized to start with. It was just an optical illusion that the old curtains were causing. She just shook her head and told me that they were not your everyday, ordinary illusion, that I apparently had caught the attention of some creature called Guppy, shadow eyes on the ceiling. At this point I couldn't help but roll my eyes, thinking, oh, here we go again. You see, despite the fact that she's a nurse, who's good at what she does, she still believes in the old superstitions. Her great-grandparents were immigrants from Norway and Germany. They migrated here to America long before World War I and World War I happened. I guess they couldn't help but entrench their children in the old pagan ways and beliefs, and so 3 generations of the family were highly superstitious, and that couldn't help but rub off on my mom. I, of course, do not believe in silly nonsense like supernatural creatures, bad luck, or any of that stuff. I tend to believe that there is always a rational explanation for everything. Anyway, my mom was explaining to me about Guppy, which roughly translates to God eyes in English. People in ancient times used to think that they were the eyes of their gods or goddesses watching them, which is why they named it that. However, a few people believed that those were the eyes of some supernatural stalker, not a deity apparently. Guppy was like some sort of voyeuristic spirit that often got obsessed with any living thing that happened to catch its attention, and just like with human stalkers, it often formed a strong attachment to the person that it was stalking. They would often become violent towards anybody who they thought were purposely getting in the way between them and the object of their affections. That often meant spouses, boyfriends, girlfriends, and family members, and it would always follow the object of their affections around until the person died of old age or something else. I responded that it was certainly an entertaining story, but that was it. Just a story. I explained to her that it was only the curtains casting those weird shadows, nothing more. I thought that if I gave her a rational explanation for the eyes, she would shut up about it, but she didn't. She kept on bringing up the topic about me getting a priest to exorcise the whole apartment so that Guppy wouldn't come back. She also kept on coming back almost every day to check up on me, to the point where I almost had no privacy at all. It was like it moved in with me. Around July 29th, I was completely fed up with my mother's foolishness. Thanks to my temper, I made the worst mistake that I had ever made in my life. I decided to rant about the whole thing to my silent observers, the eyes. I ranted about how idiotic my mom was being about them, and how she kept on trying to talk me into getting a priest to exorcise the whole apartment to get rid of them. I told the eyes that I believed them to be completely harmless, that they wouldn't ever hurt anybody, that's why I was fine with them being there. After I cooled down, I felt completely stupid for talking to shadows on the ceiling. I swore to myself then that I wouldn't let my mother's foolishness get to me. I was almost starting to think of the eyes as a living entity, for Pete's sake. It was then I decided that I would go out shopping for a pair of new curtains. After all, it wasn't like I was a poor college student anymore. I could afford some new curtains and get rid of the eyes on the ceiling. It would shut up my mother once for all. I came back with a pair of red blackout curtains which had this really nice velvet feel to them. I took down the old blankets and installed the new curtains. It was sundown by this point, so after I was done with it I went to bed. The next morning, I noticed that the eyes weren't there anymore. I couldn't help but smirk mentally, thinking, in your face, Mom. I knew it wasn't a supernatural entity. I texted my mother about how I got new curtains, and also about how the eyes were gone now, so she didn't need to worry about me anymore. She didn't respond back, and didn't visit me anymore for the whole week. In fact, she dropped all contact. At first, a part of me was slightly worried, but I just put it off as her being really busy with work. After all, sometimes she would become a huge workaholic at the hospital where she worked, so much so that she had no time to check her text messages or stop by to see me. It was basically normal activity for her. But one early morning by the end of the week, I got a call from my dad. Apparently he hadn't seen my mom week-long, but he had gotten a written memo from her about staying at my apartment if her work required her to come in at 3 a.m. So he didn't really worry too much. However, he started to miss her, so he called Mom on his cell phone, but nobody answered. Then he called the hospital hoping to get a hold of her, but they told him that she hadn't come to work in a few days. Now worried, he called me and asked me if I had seen Mom in a while. I told him, of course I haven't. She's been busy with work. But then he told me what the hospital told him about his wife not coming into work, or having the police search for her. Now God, I really hope nothing happened to her. Now for the worst part of my story, the eyes came back. After we reported her missing, creepy eye in the living room, they appeared again one early morning, acting as if they had never left to start with. Now they stare down at me, watching my every move. They're not just confined to my bedroom anymore. The eyes have started spreading to the rest of my apartment. They first branched out into my bathroom, so that they could watch me bathe and do my business. I have to tell you, it's really difficult when you feel like you're being watched. After they were on conquering the bathroom, some of them moved into the kitchen, then the living room. Now there won't be any place in my own home that I could hide from those eyes. I've thought about moving, but what if my mom was right? What if it really is got BUGT, who intends to stalk me everywhere until I die? No, there has to be a rational explanation for this, right? Maybe I turned into this insane person and just didn't know it. But maybe that's even worse. What if I did something to my own mother and then forgot about it?